let's do some. Oh, we're streaming, aren't we? Ian, are we on?
Yes.
Jolly good. Good morning, world. So our meeting is being live streamed for public viewing during the meeting. So we would switch the camera on in the event that we needed to for any reason. We've not come across one of those reasons yet, but we would if it seemed appropriate. So I've got some apologies, first of all, from Dawn Warwick, Lucy Waters, but we have Rebecca Wellbeing deputising, Di Colford-Stoker. We are missing Mike Lane at the moment, but he is at a CCG meeting that we've asked to attend, and he will be coming in at some point during the morning. And Jonathan and Huda. Was Jonathan coming, not Nikki?
Yes, that's
right. Okay. So, but we are expecting them both. Okay. Thank you. Any declarations of interest, particularly if they're not on the register, which they should be. Thank you. Shall we do the minutes of the last meeting, which was our February meeting?
Flagging up on page 2.
Yeah.
So it's about the third point down. It says communication with primary care and GPs set up between the Federation and CAS. That should then state the Federation in their role as the provider of the planning or care together contract.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful clarity. Anything else on accuracy? Sure.
Just on page 4, right in the middle, under transforming care for people with learning disabilities, I could just suggest we change one word. It says only one patient made from the original identified cohort from Winterbourne Review. Actually said post Winterbourne Review. Because the outpatients were happy from Winterbourne Review. That cohort was identified after the Winterbourne Review episode, so we perhaps change to post Winterbourne.
Yeah, absolutely, thank you. Anything else on accuracy? And I don't think there weren't any specific actions. Oh, there was. So, Sean, just on the health visitors.
Yeah, anything about publishing that data is split by CCG, I'm afraid, so we haven't got it from them. I'm not sure they're going to either, to be honest.
Okay. Any matters arising? Graham?
Just one that I don't think we'll otherwise get to anywhere on the agenda, so it was item 16008 around primary care commissioning from last time. So just to confirm with the board that we did sign and submit the delegation agreement for primary care commissioning together with a side letter which was agreed between the CCGs and South West London with NHS England. So that has all happened.
Excellent, that's a great step forward, thank you. Anything else? Jamie, is that a wave or not? No. Pen down. Thank you. Chair's actions, I don't believe there were any, Sandra, am I right? Thank you. Okay, so let's launch into our clinical focus area. Well, this is patient and public involvement. Hardev, this is your swan song.
It is. It's spotlight on me for a while, but actually it's not about me today. And so what we're going to do is something different today. We're going to have a preview of a video, and while the comms team get the Oscar-nominated video set up, I just wanted to introduce this item. And it won't be just me. I will ask Colin if he's able to step forward and say a few words as well. And as he does that, I'll just set some context. So from my personal view, it's been an absolute privilege working with the PPI team, and more importantly, the people who make up all the work out in Wandsworth. And one of the reasons why it's been a privilege has been able to see some of the benefits of what we as a CCG can deliver on the ground. And that doesn't happen very often, and certainly sitting in finance I don't see a lot of that, so working here with the PPI team really helped me understand and appreciate the good work that goes on. For this item there are no papers, there is no question, rather what we'd be looking for is more about understanding what happens next, and it's really more a case of informing the board that actually this work goes on and isn't it quite some achievement to be able to say that we can make a difference, small differences, but have a big impact on people. And that's a really important point that I've learned working in the CCG over the last 3 years. About while working behind the scenes in finance, actually you can have a big and influential impact. Colin, do you want to give some context in terms of how we've got to this point?
Yeah. First thing I would say though is you will be getting a PPI annual report at the next board meeting. You will remember that you've asked us to do these reports every year, so we just put the final touches to that, and it's out with our patient reps.
Use a mic, so
Colin, do you want to just grab the microphone?
or even just.
1, 2, 1, 2.
Just take it out, if you want to take it out the stand,
Sorry.
and then there's a button on it.
Yeah, so you will be getting PPI annual report at your next board meeting. But just to give you a little bit of background to where the videos come from. The videos is about the program we run, which is the Community and Seldom Heard Grants scheme. And Hardev is right to mention PPI in that, although the majority of the work at the moment comes under the Thinking Partners group, but it actually grew out of an idea when you were in GP consortia days, and you asked us to think quite creatively about how we could engage the community. And what we did is we came up with a small grant scheme to try and reach some of the groups out there that we don't normally hear from. And its purpose was very simple, really, in those days. It was to create a conversation and to create an opportunity for those organisations to come and talk to the CCG through the Thinking Partners group about some of the issues that they were facing as communities. It's been incredibly successful, I think, as a grant scheme. Grants are normally no more than about £2,500. But some of the criteria have been that they have to attend the Thinking Partners group. Some groups found that quite onerous in the early days, but actually the vitality and the creativity of the Thinking Partners group means that even when people are not getting the grant, they're still coming to the meetings. Just one other thing on the Thinking Partners group. Someone said to me a couple of years ago, what will you do if the Thinking Partners group gets too big? And I said, well, we'll open the other room. And we had to do that last month. So we might have to start thinking about the terms of reference again in the future. But the fact that we can get, and I think we had somewhere in the region of 50 people there representing about 40 organisations, just shows what those communities think about the fact that they can find a way to engage with the CCG. I'm just going to hand over to Val from the comms team, because she was more instrumental in getting the video made. So she'll just tell you a little bit about the process that we went through with that.
Hello, everybody. Not used to talking on a mic. So I'm the communications manager at Wandsworth CCG, and Hardev and Colin asked me to make a film to showcase the work that they've been doing through the Seldom Heard Grants scheme, and it was a really good project to work on. It's not often that you've got so much material to work with when you're asked to do an assignment for a CCG. So I set about asking Colin what kind of grants were given, what kind of organisations were included, what was the work done, and I had plenty to choose from because the variety and the scope of work that's been funded is really broad and varied across the borough. So we set out to do a 4-minute film, It's actually 8 minutes because there was so much brilliant material out there, and some of the stars of the film are here today. Don't rush her too quickly. So I really hope you enjoy it and you can learn from, just to get a little snapshot of the amazing work that's going on out there. And this is the global premiere, people, so do very well. After today's meeting, we'll be publishing it on the website, on social media, Facebook, showing it with the projects and some of the partners, so people can, first of all, see the work that we've been doing and see the contribution the CCG has been making, but also be encouraged and inspired to come to the CCG and maybe have a grant or get involved in shaping the health services in the borough. So I hope you enjoy it.
Folks, if you need
Feel
to
free
shift
to
your
move.
chair around a bit, then that's fine. Do a little bit of furniture removing might help.
Put them up here and
The Seldom Heard Grant scheme allows organisations to do a small piece of health promotion work within their community, but its primary aim is to bring those communities into the CCG so that they have a voice here. We're really pleased that we've been able to give grants to about 40 organisations working with a variety of different communities in Wandsworth. These have ranged from older people, black and minority ethnic groups, mental health groups with communication difficulties. It also provides an opportunity for staff to get out into the community and talk to community organisations about what's happening there, so that can inform commissioning decisions.
The challenge is being in jail is trying to keep your life on track that's outside and not let things change, but they do.
Safe Ground is an arts education organisation. We're 21 this year, and we were set up to promote the arts and drama as educational and transformational tools with community groups and people in prison.
When I was coming out of jail, my concerns was having somewhere to stay, being able to go to the doctors and the dentist, just normal everyday things that people take for granted.
Our Seldom Heard Grant allowed us to go in, set up and run a focus group with a group of 10 men in HMP Wandsworth to talk about their experience and perception of access to GP services and health services before, during and after prison.
Just asking a man in general about his health, he's going to tell you he's okay. It needs to be maybe in the forefront, and there needs to be ideas raised in order to challenge us men to deal with our health more efficiently.
The Autumn Rose Club operates 1 day per week. We have seminars which address issues in society and issues that's affecting those who use the club. It's helping us to run a series of health and well-being cooking demonstration classes, and we've completed 8 weeks, and we have another 2 sessions lined up, and the sessions were well attended.
We've seen what happened in society and the different form of diseases and so forth, and the obesity of people. It's just that it's best to eat healthily. It helps in avoiding heart disease, strokes, because some of those come by overheating, by loneliness, being obese.
I'm thankful to the ones at CCG so that we may continue to work together so that we can have a better and healthier population of Wandsworth.
Connect is a charity for people with communication difficulties, primarily after stroke, but neurological difficulties as well.
When I had a stroke for quite a long time, quite a number of years, I felt incredibly sort of isolated, and that's part of the problem of having aphasia. That because you have communication problems, sometimes you can't speak properly, a lot of the time you can't understand properly, and so making communication with other people is a big problem.
The Seldom Heard Grant money has gone to develop the steering group. The steering group is people with aphasia coming together to talk about their experiences of being at GP surgeries and accessing healthcare. So we've come together in order to try and create some recommendations that we can put forward to the CCG. And so these people can have a voice about their experiences and what they want.
SHARE has been operating in Wandsworth for over 40 years. It offers training and support towards employment for adults with disabilities. I come here to work with the residents on creating an operating garden, a garden that's more than just decorative, so that the aim is to produce food, to bring the residents together in practical and meaningful activities.
One time comes and we've got all the activities set up. You can see that they are motivated, they're willing to take part of the team. You can see that they're willing to learn things, and every week they become more confident within themselves.
First Down project, our principal aim is to prevent and overcome social isolation. We work very hard here to keep a simple focus on bringing people together so that they can share a range of challenging activities. Tends to be a combination of exercise, social conversational groups and arts and crafts groups. We also have our supported transport service. So the catchment area for our minibus service is really South Wandsworth. The small grant that we had from the Seldom Heard Grant Fund allowed us to take a little bit of time out to evaluate the exercise programme that we're offering.
I had health issues, lot of health issues. But since joining the class, before I couldn't even walk the hill. Now I can even run the hill. I had diabetes, which is completely gone now. I can't really thank the project so much, what they have done for me.
We want to maintain a service for older people where they know that they have regular exercise each week. It's not time limited. Ideally what we would like is a longer term commission for a continuous exercise programme in the setting that we have here.
Aurora's been going now since 2006, and it's a counselling service, but in fact we call it a trauma recovery service now, and also community for adult survivors of childhood abuse. A lot of people that we meet that can't afford therapy, they just can't afford it. So the Seldom Heard Grants scheme has offered us the opportunity to be able to increase access for a lot of people who can't afford services.
Aurora is key for your recovery, and just coming here, like I say, you feel relaxed.
I was ashamed, probably of my past more than now. I'm not. I think that I need to be heard, and I have a right to be heard, which is the difference. Whereas before, I never believed that.
It's finally being able to talk about what happened as a child. It might start off slow, but after time you will get there and you will be a survivor. You will be a survivor.
Well, how completely inspiring. Absolutely amazing. I can't thank the people enough who are doing all those things out there. Absolutely amazing. And, we must do everything we can to make sure the people involved in their communities and doing such amazing stuff. Oh, and they're having another go. We must make sure that people, you know, are helped and facilitated to keep doing that brilliant work, and that they get the chance to talk to us about what they're doing and help us to do our job better. I think that's the key thing here, isn't it? It's those connections with the people in our communities that we must maintain. So, Hardev, any more reflection on that?
So just a couple of points there. So I think you said the word that I was aiming to emphasise, which is around the connection piece and maintaining that. And I think it's taken us. We've built on a strong foundation, and now that connection is well and truly in place. I think the key for us is making it continue and strengthening that going forward. And I'm confident that the CCG and working with local authority in terms of public health, we've got a strong level of engagement, and we've got really good stakeholder involvement. We've also agreed at the last board we mentioned the voluntary sector coordinator post, and all these mechanisms are helping to really make that connection stronger. And so I would like to make sure that whether it's 12 months time, 6 months time, we are able to report back and say we've developed this even more, and we've got a wider reach. You know, people tell me there's 900 odd voluntary groups in around Wandsworth. What we've seen is a small snippet, but even that's powerful enough. So there is a huge potential out there, and as long as we've got that connection and we continue to be engaged, then I think the CCG and the health of the population will continue to grow in a positive way.
Okay. So, reflections and thoughts from others. Carol.
I'd like to thank Hardev for taking such a lead in this. We are the envy of other CCGs in having the Chief Financial Officer lead on PPI. It makes a huge difference. And thank you very much, Hardev.
Indeed. Peter?
Yes, it was very difficult to follow that. It sort of speaks for itself. But actually, if one imagines recognising doing all of that at scale, if you add together the sort of 900 organisations and the activity that they do, and then look at the true impact in its totality, it's actually quite extraordinary and possibly beyond what we do sometimes, to be honest with you. So actually following on your point, the sort of support and facilitation and maintaining the connections is absolutely critical. And also, one, recognising it, two, in whatever terms it is, investing in it is going to be absolutely critical, really. And maintain the visibility and the recognition that there are those out there that are greater experts than us at delivering care at various levels. So that needs to be recognised.
Great.
So clearly to celebrate the success and all of the good work that's gone on is really important, so a very big thank you to everyone involved. I was just thinking, Hardev, as you leave us, so it's really important to embed this in some really practical, tangible steps. So I think, you know, we'd all sign up to the vision and the way forward, but it needs to be grounded, doesn't it, in actual practical steps. So I just wondered if you, or indeed other members of the team who are working in this area, would like to kind of advise or guide the board as to, in the next 6-12 months, think about these things very particularly.
Yeah, so if you recall, probably we had the annual E-Day event, and at that event we had really good discussions and presentations. One insightful presentation from Lawrence from Public Health, which is really good insight. And I think that, to me, that's a key part of making this work, is to have that engagement and that understanding through public health. So that's one piece. The other bit that certainly I mentioned was around having it at scale, which is the point that Peter was mentioning, and having the ability to do it with a level of vigour behind that. And if you have that scale and vigour with the right evidence base behind it, I certainly think that's you're onto something there. But the challenge is, when you do things at scale, you start to lose some of those vital pieces that make that work. and that's going to be a challenge. And certainly talking to colleagues, even yesterday, we started mapping through some of the governance structure of how we can make this work, from a voluntary sector engagement piece through to supporting how those groups can actually influence the way we commission services, and also how we can actually translate the language commissioners speak, which is much more understandable for those in the voluntary sector. So I think we've got a governance structure with those engagement stakeholders in place, and we'll be looking for key members of clinical engagement through Dr. Elvis as well. I think we'll be well set up, and I'd like to think that with that in place, we should be in a strong position going forward. And I should point out, we do have a very strong PPI team as well, which have been able to deliver time and time again on limited resources. So well done to them as well.
Okay, yeah. Stephen.
Well, obviously echo the appreciation of the work and very moving video, so thank you. I had a question, which as partly at Hardev and possibly at Hooder as well. I haven't quite got my head round how this work relates to the work of the local authority and particularly the Health and Wellbeing Board. And I'm conscious of things like the Health and Wellbeing Partnership. And I'd just be helpful perhaps if somebody could join up those dots a bit, because a lot of this around and a number of players in this.
So I'll kick off. I'm sure Hooder will want to come in on this. So again, part of the discussions we've been having recently is making sure that how do we make that connection to the Health and Wellbeing Board. At the moment, I would say it's not there. So what you see before us, we've had discussions about whether we showcase this at the Health and Wellbeing Board, about making those links much more stronger, and the role of actually PPI in Health and Wellbeing Board. But certainly the level that we're operating at the moment is more about we've been inviting public health into those discussions, and they've been able to step up and contribute and support the group in that. So that's a positive aspect. The next stage is a bit about the Health and Wellbeing Board and translating it into the Health and Wellbeing strategy as well. And again, that's one of the reasons why we needed this voluntary sector coordinator post, because the Health and Wellbeing strategy is quite a large scale project, and to make that happen you need to have a coordination of the voluntary sector. So I think it will happen with time.
Who did you want to?
Yeah, two areas. One is to respond to Steve's question, answer to Steve's question, another generally on the programme. So I think he right to raise his questions, and as you know, Steve, the Health and Wellbeing Board is soul searching at the moment in terms of how it improves its impact and what its focus. And one of the areas it wants to focus on is prevention and community resilience, and this is an ideal kind of moment to bring everything together and see how we can move it forward. So I support the question and the issue. Regarding the scale of the program, and this is really off the cuff, but I was listening, I totally agree the need to upscale, but also there is a byproduct, which is the connectedness of the community. It's not about scale, and we shouldn't lose that. One possibility is to run to have two parallel issues. One is the general connectivity, which is doing what has been done. Another one, in relation to this, also pick up a theme for the year and focus on the groups that will help with the theme. For example, the public health reports this year, as you know, is focusing on diabetes, and it's going to be an extremely user-friendly report. And how about using that to kind of for the year, this will be our campaign for the year, to work with the front line to get people to help themselves and self-manage, etc. So just a thought, but something we can discuss outside.
Andy and then Rebecca.
So thank you. Colin, did you say that next month you're going to bring the annual report to the board?
Yes.
Okay. So I think that'd be really helpful to have perhaps a bigger, more rounded discussion about PPI, because I know last year when you presented we talked about the patient voice in CRGs and how we can really harness that and some of the critical friends element you were doing with community adult health service as well. So it'd be perhaps really good, probably not for now, but for next month to really kind of have a focus on, is there anything more as a CCG internally we can be doing to try and reach out there alongside these schemes as well?
Thank you. Rebecca.
I was just going to say, later we're looking at the operating plan, and it just feels to me that by the time we get the guidance for the operating plan, it's too late to really do the proper engagement with thinking partners and organisations that have got really sort of strong input across all our commissioning programmes. So I just really want to think about how we start that work, you know, from April through the year, so that by the time we get the planning guidance, we already know what people think, and we know what, you know, that our plans actually connect to what people are doing sort of out beyond the organisation.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. I was just thinking about this at scale idea. So clearly, I think we need frameworks within which we can manage all of this and make sure we're doing all the right things. But at scale, to me, really means an aggregate of all the important small things that are going on, and how we make sure that's kind of pervasive enough and just normalised in Wandsworth, really. And also, although this is very much about the kind of the voluntary sector organisations, and what we want to do is you know, penetrate that more and enable more people to be involved and recognise what more organisations are doing. But there's the other aspect of it, which is the sort of the community groups which aren't official, and how we also kind of build that in, really. And I don't know whether that's too big an ask, but I think you know, we need the focus on the grant scheme as a mechanism for making some of this happen, but we have to think more broadly than that as well. So I'd encourage people to think creatively about that, perhaps in the Thinking Partners group. Actually, that's probably the best place for it. One other thing which I wanted to raise was when we first started to think about Seldom Heard groups, we wanted to make sure that our GP community was very kind of aware of what was going on and really quite integrated in the work that was going on in their communities. And we set up the Seldom Heard Group scheme for GP practices, which meant that, in fact, it was someone from every GP practice and someone from every CRG would go out into one of the groups each year and come back and feed into their organisation and try and create those connections, which are enduring, really. And so that's been going for 2 or 3 years now, and I think we need to think about how we can evolve that scheme into something even more effective with our new role as commissioners of primary care. How can we make sure that patient groups in primary care are really have a connection with the Seldom Heard groups and aren't just, you know, the usual people around the table, which I think sometimes PPI can suffer from if you don't really kind of keep going with it. And just the other thing I wanted to say is, so I've been trying to come to a Thinking Partners group all year and not managed to. I will very soon. I would really like to. So I hope that I'll be allowed through the door with that one. And I wanted to ask if anybody here wanted to say anything else to contribute to this discussion, which I think has been really helpful. Yeah.
So I'm very proud of the work that all of the PPI team and everybody else within Wandsworth do. But and I think that it's really exciting to see the board engaging with the work that has been going on for so many years within the community and the voluntary sector in Wandsworth. But there's also a bit of a reality check as well in relation to two things that I've experienced. One, of course, is the sustainability of the voluntary sector organisations themselves. There are 900 of them, as you say, and it's great to have connectivity and awareness, but we also need money because we can't sustain ourselves. And the Seldom Heard Grants, it's a non-profit grant, which are really, really helpful, but it's non-recurrent funds. And so there is a practicality about, again, I know I've used this phrase before because I'm running my mouth at it. So that's one aspect of it, which I hope will come from the greater connectedness that we all are looking to achieve. But the second thing is something about the sort of the power dynamics within, when you're talking about the Health and Wellbeing Board, Health and Wellbeing Partnership, and how that level of decision making interacts up and down through the health economy across all of these very broad and diverse groups. Because when I have tracked the sort of discussions that go on within the really well-run Health Watch meetings to gather community feeling and experiences, when I've tracked what has come out of those meetings, amongst others, and how it gets fed up through the pyramid to the Health and Wellbeing Board, the voices and the ideas gets continually diluted, so that by the time it gets to the board, even through the Health and Wellbeing Partnership, the passion and the ideas and the power gets significantly lost, partly because the Health and Wellbeing Board, the way that it's set up, is very formal, it's not inclusive, it's very difficult for individuals or groups to make their voices heard within that, but partly because of all of the competing demands that go on within the sort of strategic decision making that goes on there. So there are two aspects that I think need really close attention. One of them is the financial aspects, to try and sustain the groups that go on, including connectivity, to support connectivity. But the other is something about the power dynamics from the top down. Because at the moment, we have very powerful voices within the community, but they get lost by going through the system. And I think that is really, really important, that we try and address that. So maybe it's by looking at the terms of reference on the board, the Health and Wellbeing Board. Maybe it's by working closely with people like Malik to try and do it bottom up rather than top down. But it's something about that dynamic which is diluting the possibility of change and the voice of the people. So it's just a plea.
Yeah. So, Kate, I think you make some very good points. Hardev?
Yeah. If I may, particularly on the first point around the funding issue. So what I would say is CCG, the local authority, voluntary sector, going through an extremely challenging financial period, and there's no let up on that. And whatever we've done in the past, as with any other organisation, something needs to change for it to be sustainable. So one of the things that we've talked about is having this, as I mentioned, the voluntary sector coordinator role. And what that is aiming to do is to allow the CCG to understand the voluntary sector offering more clearly, and also for the voluntary sector to understand the CCG intentions, commissioning intentions more clearly. And with that, the theory, from my perspective, is one where it allows a greater transparency and flow of funds on the basis of delivering certain outcomes. And you get to a point where actually the voluntary sector as a whole becomes a key provider, rather than a disparate number of small organisations all trying to chase the same pound. So that's the aim behind that, and the measure of success is actually seeing the voluntary sector grow and deliver the commissioning requirements that the CCG sets out. So we're totally agreed on that, and the business case has been approved, and that's going ahead. So that will happen. The other piece around the aspects around Health Watch, I think I'd be right in saying what Huda was mentioning about the currently revision of the way that is constructed, and even the terms of reference are being reviewed. So that I'm sure that will be picked up. I would say that there are other forums that I think will be just as effective as well. So as part of the discussions I've been having with the voluntary sector is about how do you get that dialogue where if the voluntary sector has certain ways or good ideas that can be more effective, even if you took, say for instance, a diabetes issue there, if there's a proposal, how does that feed into the health aspect and social care? And at the moment we're developing a governance structure based around this voluntary sector coordinator role that would support and help that mechanism. So organisations are able to have that discussion, probably not in the more formal arena as a Health and Wellbeing Board, but certainly in a way that allows the freedom to challenge and discuss that, to really harness some of those ideas in a more clear way that could then eventually make its way to the Health and Wellbeing Board.
Jamie.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with most of that. There's just one phrase rang an alarm bell with me, and that was seeing the voluntary sector as a key provider. I think it's a bit more than that. The voluntary sector is something organic and dynamic. And I think it's slightly alarming to see the voluntary sector as a provider. It's more than that. It's more complex.
No, I agree.
It's kind of reductionist, really. Call it a provider.
Okay. Sean, yeah.
I just wanted to say that I think what we have had this morning in the film is essentially 7 seldom heard group visits, all in one film, for all of us to experience. And I don't think I'd be lying when I say that each one of us has had a personal experience listening to this film this morning. And this is the fundamental premise of the Seldom Heard Group visits, particularly the GP visits, is that we are increasing our awareness of what actually the third sector is doing in our community and how it supports our community and the people that we are actually looking after in our surgeries that we are commissioning for. So much as we're talking, and it's really important to talk about how we take it bigger, I think the success of this so far has been about individual experiences. And I think we must not lose that. And that's one of the reasons why the more we do our own personal visits, never mind the other implications, we are transforming ourselves by experiencing what goes on out there. And so we shouldn't lose that.
Great, thank you. Joan, did you have something?
It's quite similar to what Sean has said actually, but just to expand, finance is important, because without finance we can't survive. The other importance is the human feel, human touch, and with connectivity would enhance our work both ways. If within the community we have more representation from those who make decisions in the various areas that the community and residents receive. So if that can be another strategy to avail resources, because we know that the resources of employed staff are very limited and they're very stretched as well. So we need to consider that. And also, when the community get to experience those who are making decisions, to meet with them, trust develops, and that's another challenge where the community is not happy with, because they feel that decisions are being made without them being involved. Yet the decisions will affect them, if you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
So another good mechanism would be to enhance or to make available the possibility of visiting and meeting the local community.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Thank you. Well, so probably not much more to say really, except we'll really be interested in the PPI report next time, because I think this has been a sort of important baseline for us to work from in that. I think it's probably opened the possible discussions about that paper up much more. So thank you. I think it's, as I say, really inspiring for our board to be engaged in this, and no dilution of this, Kate. I think you know this was absolutely as it is, and so thanks again to all of those that have contributed both to the work and also just to creating the video and the PPI team as well. I'm in full flow, Joe. Go on. Go on.
I totally forgot. I was so focused on what I was wanting to say. I just wanted to thank Colin and Hardev and Valerie and their team for allowing us this opportunity, because without them being convinced that they were spending money for quality in return, if they hadn't given us the opportunity, we wouldn't know the impact or the involvement that we need to put in. And our group has grown tremendously with the ability to share in what's not just of benefit to our group, but to others who might be able to follow suit. Okay. Our next lunch is next Tuesday.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody. That's great. It's going to be hard to move on now, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. Yes. So roll on, Hardev. Roll on.
Right. In two questions, just an equal level of privilege. I've been tasked over the last 3 years to present the finance position for the CCG, and this month we're taking an insight not just into where we are for 2015-16, but also looking ahead into 2016-17. And Neil will be going through the report. As a high-level summary, it's safe to say that we're securing the 15-16 position as we speak. So by the time we do get to the reporting end of March position, I'm confident we will have achieved our financial targets, which is an important milestone for us to have achieved. Secondly, around the 16-17, as you would expect at this stage, there's still a level of uncertainty, quite a high level of risk, higher than previous years, and also I think we'll be flagging up at this stage that the plans are yet to be finalised, but we should be aware that we're going into a territory that we haven't been before in the past. So with that, Neil.
Thank you.
Right.
Okay.
Go for it.
Thank you. Forgive my croaky voice. Hopefully it won't give up on me during this presentation. I'm going to go through 15, 16 very quickly because I'm conscious of time, but hopefully the message is you've heard most of those before. So I'll just take you straight to slide 4 if I can, just to highlight that we're still on target to achieve our target surplus and that the QIP will be achieved as well. Slide 5 just looks at the allocations we've received. So for this month we've received the overseas visitors allocation, and in addition some further adjustments around the Healthy London Partnership and some South West London transformation schemes and risk pools. Slides 7 to 10 pick up the acute position. So this has been reasonably stable this month, but there are a couple of factors within there. So we've got a very high cost patient within the Royal Brompton service, over 300,000 that came through, but offset by some capacity money that was returned to us from St George's. Just to note in there also that the overseas visitors allocation actually covered the expenditure that we've had coming through there. There was at one point we did think there might have been a pressure around that, but we've actually managed to keep that within the budget. Slide 11 looks at non-acute services, so it's just the same risk that we've had previously. Continuing care still remains our biggest risk there. There are some areas that now have actually come back into balance, or actually have been more favourable, mainly around prescribing and mental health placements are slightly lower is the forecast around that. So slide 12 just highlights just the key risks that we've got, and I think probably given the time of year that the key risks remain continuing care and acute contracts. I think the other areas on there are relatively low risk. We're confident that we're going to achieve the QIP. So I would say it's just those two areas really. And then slides 19 to 22 just cover the balance sheet. Again, more for information, but really just to note there are a couple of targets within that. So there is a cash requirement, so we have to ensure that our cash that's available at the end of the month has to be 1.25% of the balance that we drew down, so that we can't have any more than that, and we've achieved that every month. And in addition, that we have to make our payments within 30 days of receipt of invoice, and again we're on track to achieve that as well. So that's the 15-16 position. If there's any, I'll pause for some questions now on that.
Anything? No? Good, okay. Scot-free, well done. I think just said that we should underestimate how much work goes into all of that you've just said in a few minutes. You know, it's immense, and you know we mustn't take it for granted. We've got a really efficient system here working in the. So well done, Hardev. Another congratulations.
Yes, not without its challenges this year.
No, I know.
So moving forward on to 16, 17. So I think these slides have been to the board before, so I've just again flagged the sort of new areas. So just in terms of the timetable, we did submit our financial plan, so that was our second submission on the 3rd of March. That went in on time, and there have been some issues which we'll come on to in terms of that submission that went through. So if I can, just take us on to slide 26 around the draft business rules. So this is really just to flag, these are the rules that are in place. It's really just looking at what's the national rules, London rules and local rules. So the main one there to flag is the fact that we should deliver a 1% surplus, and that is a national requirement. In addition, we did flag that we wanted to have £1 million investment reserve in place as well, that would enable us for investments in future QUIP programmes in later years. So on slide 27, this is talking about the summary of the 1% non-recurrent reserve. And in the 8th of February submission, we made the, when we made that submission, we assumed that all the non-recurrent items that we funded from that reserve would be committed. So that mainly is around the South West London risk pool, transformation schemes, etc. In addition, we'd set aside £1 million for investing in the MCP in 16-17. However, the latest guidance that came out and was sort of confirmed a couple of days before we had to make the final submission was that we weren't allowed to commit any funds to that 1% non-recurring reserve. And the main reason around that is really to sort of form a risk pool, mainly around the SPG, but that would also include providers potentially having access to that risk pool that's in place. So what we had to do for that latest plan was then to therefore take out the risk pool and ensure that we had it set aside uncommitted. So slide 28 really just puts into numbers all those items that I've just said there. You can see the other thing probably just to know, two items on there. The South West London risk pool was the only uncommitted amount that we had. But experience would tell us that probably it would get committed anyway. And also that the 1% non-recurrent reserve also includes the primary care allocation as well that's come through. So, just in terms of the change in business rules, the CCG then has to decide how it's actually how it's going to actually cover the fact that we've got that 1% non-recurrent. The other issues that we'd have, this is against the backdrop of a very challenging QUIP programme. It's one of the highest that the CCG has had, in fact the highest. And obviously the fact that with contract negotiations ongoing, there's clearly risks in there that we weren't actually sure that we were able to cover the full 1% in that risk pool. So what the CCG therefore decided was that it would only deliver a 0.5% non-recurrent surplus. And I think slide 30 flags on here how we would actually generate that 0.5% surplus. Sorry, I just need to. Okay. Apologies, that was my.
Shall I just do this slide because actually it's hard for me because I'm the one who pulled this one. So trying to interpret my thinking on this one. So what we have to understand is on the non-recurrent reserve. So this is a change in the rules that the Treasury have suddenly asked CCGs across the country to implement. What they've said is you need to hold 1% of your total income as uncommitted. So there's got to be nothing badged against it. So as a CCG, we have to make some tough decisions. How do you generate that 1%? And we said, okay, we won't have a risk pool across South West London. And actually, we had originally planned to use some of the money to support the cost of treating a backlog of patients waiting more than 18 weeks. And also we plan to invest in developing a multi-specialty community provider. As a result of the change in those rules, we're now unable to commit to those at this stage. So therefore we've had to put that into a part of money saying that's how we're going to make up this 1%. And as a consequence behind that, we're also unable to deliver our original plan of delivering a 1% surplus. And if you remember what Neil mentioned at the start was, part of the business rules is that you deliver a 1% surplus. So as it stands today, we have a 0.5% surplus, which doesn't meet the business rules. But also we have sacrificed £1 million worth of investments, and we're likely to face financial pressures resulting in how we support the cost of those people waiting longer than 18 weeks. On top of that, we also have the highest level of savings target that we need to achieve for 16-17 that the CCG has ever had to deliver. That's the context of where we are. I think, is that right, Neil?
Yes, that's right.
So if we can just take us to slide 32, this really looks at the QIP and where we are with that. So for this year, or for 16-17, it's going to be essential that we do deliver the QIP, given all the issues that we've just been talking about. At the moment, we've got a plan that's around about £12 million. That is going through various committees where we're scrutinising that and continue to scrutinise it. The big challenge will be that we're confident that we'll have a QIP programme that will be of the right value. The challenge will be that we have to get it delivering for 16-17. So that's the sort of the main aim around the QIP. On slide 33, this just gives an overall summary that was submitted. Really just for information. I think one of the things I would like to point out is that in terms of mental health, that the parity of esteem growth that we have to put into that area has been committed, so we're achieving that target. I think one of the questions that some people may have is that when they're looking at the mental health lines within this slide, there are other areas of mental health spend that sit in some of the other service lines, particularly around continuing care, so that won't be reflected in here. So if somebody's doing a simple calculation, they may say actually the growth in mental health is less than the growth that the CCG has achieved, but overall we are achieving the parity of esteem. Slide 34 just looks at the assumptions that are underpinning the planning that's gone in there. Again, pretty much along the lines of what's gone into this year. The tariff inflator in there is probably the only difference that we've got, so there is an inflation this year for acute providers. That's an overall value. When you apply it to each individual contract, that value may change, but on an overall basis, that's around about the right level of inflation. Obviously, to note on there, the surplus required, we're obviously not at the moment looking to achieve. So I think on slide 35, this is looking at the financial risks that we've got ahead of us. So clearly, not hitting the 1% surplus means that that's going to be a big issue for us. Contracts yet to be agreed and tariff to be tested to understand the full impact of that. I think as Hardev mentioned, the RTT at the moment largely unknown, but we know that we're committed to achieving the constitutional standards. Continuing healthcare still remains and will be a big issue for us moving into next year. We have a new provider in place around that service, so there's great expectations around that. Personal health budgets obviously slightly is unknown, but the access to that may actually so there could be increase in requests. As mentioned before, the QIP plan, largest that the CCG has ever had. Primary care delegation, another area of large uncertainty. So at the moment, there's just an assumption that the allocation will equal the expenditure, but as we get into the year, that potentially may change. The negotiations with St George's are likely to be protracted, given that they're into an extensive turnaround programme, and therefore we'd have to see what potentially that may have financial impacts on the CCG, let alone delays in getting the contracts actually agreed. And I think just generally across the South West London economy, some of the issues that we've got, providers and CCGs facing very challenging financial positions. In fact, many of them forecasting financial deficits. So I think the sort of key points that I want to leave you with, in terms of contracts still to be agreed, we are meeting the 1% uncommitted non-recurrent reserve, however at a cost of only achieving a 0.5% surplus. Quit value, highest that we've ever had. The fact we wanted to put £1 million aside for investments, that's no longer, it's highly unlikely that that's going to be available in its entirety. We are meeting the parity esteem and the Better Care Fund requirements. We do expect to remain within the management costs, and we do have a 0.5% contingency reserve. So I'd just like to ask the board to note the report for 15-16, and also ask to note the financial plan for 16-17, in particular the achievement of the 0.5% surplus due to the need to generate a 1% uncommitted level of non-recurring funds.
Thank you very much, Neil. That's all very nicely laid out and clear for us. So, questions, comments, reflections on that? Peter?
Yeah, 1% uncommitted interim treasury sort of guidance and put into the business rules. I mean, that's a significant impact, and uncommitted, so just let it sit there, I'm assuming I can't do much with it. To then hear already that the impact is to diminish some of our significant plans, which we were going to invest in. That is seriously troubling. Unless there's something glorious and amazing on the horizon that we're going to be guided to do with the 1%, whether it's around mental health or whatever. It would be nice to hear that there is something to justify actually diminishing our highly significant plans that we've talked about and agreed on quite significantly. And also to take on the challenge of primary care contracting as well, with all the uncertainty that brings. So I don't know if there's any comments on that.
So there is no light. The light is well and truly off. So at the moment the guidance states that the non-recurrent uncommitted fund will be used to support providers in South West London, their financial position. Okay, so if you go back to the Chancellor's comprehensive spending review, there was an allocation of £1.8 billion across the NHS, which is the magic number to support the provider's position for 16-17. If the providers breach that 1.8 billion, that's where that 1% will be used to support that. And rather than that being used nationally, the aim is that it will be used locally to hit that target. What I would say is, that given where the providers are in South West London and the CCGs, it's highly likely that that 1% would be insufficient actually to support the deficit position in South West London.
Can I just follow that through? So that's therefore taken out of our baseline as not central monies, is number one, at a time when we've got the lowest growth as a CCG for quite some time. So it just seems a little bit ridiculous.
So you're right, we do get the lowest possible growth. It's true, it has it's very late in the day and it has diverted our investment plan. However, we are, I think, certainly in South West London, the only CCG that has, I would say, a credible plan with a quick programme and actually still managing to do better than break even. So it is a very difficult situation. I think we need to consider whether we actually go for having a 1% surplus, or as I'm hearing what you're referring to is actually why would you increase that if it compromises your long-term plans and your long-term strategy, particularly around community services, primary care services, the development of MCP, and this is compromising that impact. So my recommendation is that we stick at this stage to a 0.5% surplus, and that's probably as good as we can achieve without increasing the level of risk.
So it's very, very frustrating, this, isn't it? It's very frustrating.
Well understated.
Yeah. Because all of the things we wanted to do that you mentioned, all the investment work, would, we believe, put our acute providers in a better position in terms of their performance and the quality of care they're able to offer, and all of those important things. And yet the financial contribution to that is really a drop in the ocean. It's just, the whole thing is really hard to get your head around, I think. So I'll let other people talk. Huda and Rebecca after.
Yeah, a couple of issues related to population health outcomes rather than the actual finances as such. So one of them is the people waiting for treatment. If this is like become difficult to fund, what provisions are we making to make sure we prioritize people who are kind of like at risk of worse health outcomes? For example, someone who is with AF waiting for ablation, for example. You know, things like that. What provisions will the CCG have to prioritize these cases? The other question is, we're being assured around parity of esteem and mental health from a finance point of view. What does that really mean for the public, especially with mental health services have been on the news recently around, you know, the public, the patients, the users are not seeing the parity of esteem. So,
yes, so two very good questions. Thanks. On the first question about how do you prioritise on the referral to treatment greater than 18 weeks, I'm probably going to ask Sean to just pick up on the way that works through. I think what's clear though, it's not determined by a financial mechanism, it's based on a clinical mechanism, not a financial mechanism. But I'll let Sean answer that. On the second issue around the mental health, there has been a lot of press about whether the funds have actually flowed down to the services. And I also read in the same piece that actually South West London and St George's have said that they've received a greater level of income than that. They've received their fair share of the parity of esteem. Certainly from our perspective, Dr. Tom Coffey and our commissioning colleagues have been working with the Trust to make sure that those funds are delivering the mental health services in a coordinated and planned way. And I'm sure they could share with you the plans that they've been able to draw up that show how that investment has been utilised. But be rest assured, I've been pushing to make sure that funding does come with a clear earmark of what difference that will make to services.
Okay.
So Sean.
Yeah, Sean.
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, it's important to say that patients whose clinical treatment need is urgent are treated urgently, and that's always the case, and that's decided by their clinicians, and we don't do anything to change that. So we're talking really about patients whose wait has been decided by their clinician as being routine, and that's where the 18-week target comes in for routine patients. And clearly for those patients, the expectation is that clinicians in the trusts are treating those in date order, so that patients effectively don't wait longer than other patients who are waiting for people with the same level of clinical urgency or condition. So we haven't had the conversations finalised yet with St George's around exactly how many patients need to be treated next year, so we haven't finalised those contract negotiations yet, which is why we're not able to put a number on the cost either, because we don't have the finalised activity figures. But as Neil and Hardev have been saying, it's going to be tough to provide all of that funding. I mean, clearly, as Hardev was saying, the 1% non-recurrent funding is expected to be there to cover financial pressures from providers, and I think my reading of the guidance is that's the expectation, where if there's been overperformance, say, against a contract and a provider, that's been impacting on a provider's financial position, then effectively the money's for that, but it doesn't sort of go against the provider's bottom line, it goes through us, doesn't it? So we keep the money, and effectively it covers our overspend, which could conceivably be not just for emergency admissions, it could be for things like elective weights, but clearly the whole point is that you're supposed to plan up front for what the activity that you think you need to have, and that should be coming out of that 1% non-recurrent funding. But yeah, we're still having those conversations, but certainly there's no way that we would be asking providers to sort of deprioritise or delay treatment or interfere in clinical decisions about which is a priority or not. Obviously that's not our role at all.
Yeah. Rebecca.
Just to really echo that a large proportion of our QIP is about transformation, and it's about shifting services out of hospital, and there's double running costs in that, and if we're not able to fund our QIP is really sort of seriously at risk. So it feels sort of a very circular argument that we're under pressure to deliver our QIP, and to do that, you know, to deliver the business rules, we've been asked to sort of take money away from our investment in QIP to do that. So it's a problem that it's going to have sort of serious repercussions, and it seems disappointing that we'll end up spending money on overperformance that we could have hopefully prevented by doing some things differently. And I think it's slightly the wrong message to our providers. Instead of sort of, you know, having them sort of really committed to our hospital plans, they're kind of guaranteed to get money, you know, to cover overperformance. So it's just really what other people have said. I suppose just the other areas that when we talk about QIP, we have to really sort of think more that it's not just cost saving. And I think in terms of mental health, we haven't really explored what the opportunities are for QIP against our mental health programme. And you know, we're obviously not going to reduce investment in that area, but we could be doing things better, I think, in certain parts of our pathway. So I just wanted to make sure we don't overlook that when we're developing QIP plans.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Anything else? So, Andy.
Thanks, Lynn and Hardev. So obviously I think Rebecca's made the point about kind of going round in circles when we're trying to do a lot of transformation that should support shift to out-of-hospital care. I suppose my point is really about thinking of the QIP for 17-18 really. So we start to sort of think at quite a high level around essentially what transformative things do we need to achieve to get a good level of QIP for 17-18. Which is largely around the use of the MCP, so the multi-specialty community provider, primary care, so the GPs working a lot closer in a more integrated fashion with certainly community services and probably other elements of care as well. And I think the opportunity to pump prime some of that work in 16-17 would have got us into a stronger position in 17-18 to deliver what will obviously be a challenging QIP in 17-18. So it's, I guess, a level of forward planning and horizons kind of we can perhaps factor into our ongoing conversation and say that we're in this position now, but if we want to try and be in perhaps a stronger position in 17-18, then that work really starts now. So not to sort of just say we're not going to do it because we're told we can't do it because that's the rules for this year, but really try and stretch ourselves and think about how can we release some funding to sort of really get the transformation work going so it can deliver into 17-18.
Thank you, Stephen.
And picking up on that, I think the other factor in all this is my impression is that the way NHS, I mean, firstly, this is, for clarity, this is a policy imposed by the Treasury, not by the Department of Health or NHS England. And I've heard Paul Bowman on the subject, and it's quite clear this is a Treasury imposition. And, you know, so the rights and wrongs of it, as it were, are, you know, up there. It does seem to me that in the short term, the risk of us not actually being able to access this money for our sort of local programmes must be very high, because A, the providers, you know, they've got some pretty heroic targets to achieve, and secondly, and this is my real point, my impression is that NHS England and the Treasury are increasingly thinking about the strategic planning area, not just about individual CCGs. And that accessing this money and the use of this money won't actually be decided on a kind of CCG by CCG basis. It'll be decided on, in our context, South West London. So and that worsens the challenge in a way, because clearly you know, we are at the moment the only, I think, commissioner even now in South West London in the current year who's going to make the 1% surplus. So the commissioners are already worsening, as it were, and that's before we have this hit. So what we're going to see in the future is commissioners now going into facing serious financial problems, as well as providers struggling to get out of it. And out of all that, it seems to me that if we are going to access money, well, both substantively and in terms of presentation, we have to have a really very powerful argument, story about how we're going to invest any money we can get hold of to achieve financial as well as clinical sustainability going forward. It links to clearly therefore to the South West London Collaborative, because that story is clearly going to be asked, or the exam question we're going to be put is, what's our answer to that question, not in a Wandsworth context, but in a South West London context. So it seems to me to reinforce the need to develop our, what is it we would actually do to invest, if we can get investment money at all, to address these questions going forward on a South West London basis. Because otherwise, I fear this money will just drift away into, bailouts and short-term financial fixes, and we neither invest nor resolve any underlying problems. So I kind of want to link all this conversation with the later one about the South West London Collaborative and how we're going to have a powerful story there.
Yeah, if I just picking up on that point. So when we look at the allocation of resources for CCGs going into 17, 18 and 18, 19, they go down even more. So Wandsworth will have an even tighter financial position in those two years. And therefore, the opportunity to transform was last year and this year and the coming financial year. And therefore, we certainly should be making the right noises about how you draw up those plans and what they look like. I think they stem from a very local level, whether that's at MCP level, and then all the way up to a South West London level. What we should also recognise is, as part of the planning process, there is an amount of money held nationally, which is earmarked for transformation, and there's even a small part of about 200 million that's on a first come first served basis that they would look for as strategic, whatever it's called, sustainable transformation plan groups to be able to put together a plan to access that money. And if we're able to do that in a coordinated way, I think that would certainly leave South West London into a stronger position. On a personal perspective, I think we want to focus on the local piece, getting that in a strong position to access transformation funds upwards, and that will certainly provide the momentum across the rest of South West London. So definitely support the view that it should happen sooner rather than later, and if you have got any other plans, we should bring those forward into 16, 17.
Absolutely, yeah. Rebecca?
I just wanted to add to what Hardev was saying about the sub-regional SDP, which is around St George's. Yeah. And I think it's really important that we work with Merton and George's, that any money that's accessed by St George's through the Transformation Fund, that we are really kind of influencing what that means in terms of change and shifts in patterns of care, and not just sort of seen as a sort of, to manage their deficit, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. Graham, anything to say?
Yeah, so thinking a couple of things really. So there's something, obviously the kind of spirit of doom and gloom has emerged through the conversation. So I was just sitting here reflecting on, clearly there's something about managing expectations, both of ourselves as a board, but also how we present and discuss this with colleagues in the public, really. And clearly the position is getting much, much tighter, but we did sort of know this. We had anticipated it. We've been saying for 2 or 3 years, actually, that for us locally, and indeed for South West London, the whole challenge is about both a financially and a clinically sustainable set of commissioned services, and that hasn't changed, but we've now arrived at the point that we were projecting for the last 2 or 3 years. So we have to recognise the context we're in, but I was also thinking about, we'll be talking about the operating plan in a short while. And I think as a board we also have to hold to the point that we're a £465 million commissioning organisation. We do have a lot of resource, and actually we've spent time talking about the margins in some degree, and I know they're significant of themselves in in sums, but we do need to continuously think about every pound we invest actually of that 465 million. Are we directing it in the right way, and to hold true to our aspirations for, you know, improving health of the population and the delivery of healthcare. So I think we perpetually, in a difficult financial environment, need to keep coming back and challenging ourselves really about the overall profile of resource and how we're spending it. So that's sort of a general point. The other point I didn't want to lose was just to understand as a board whether there's any consequences of going in with a plan that doesn't meet the business rules in terms of the reduced surplus position. So obviously we had to get to that point for the later submission quite quickly, but are we expecting pushback on even that proposal?
I would expect Wandsworth CCG, given that its historic nature, have always been able to meet its financial duties and deliver the business rules, that there will be a level of pushback to see if more could be done to increase it, the surplus up to 1%. But as we speak, we've gone in with a submission of 0.5%, and hopefully if the board approve on that approach, we'll continue to do that. But clearly, any movement away from that 0.5% towards 1% surplus, I think will be a very high risk position for the CCG to take, and will compromise our ability to deliver not just financial but clinical obligations going forward. But I do expect a level of challenge, particularly for Wandsworth CCG, as well as the rest of the South West.
Stephen, yes.
Can I strongly support the argument that if we do get that sort of pushback, we resist it quite firmly?
Yeah.
I think it'd be a horrible position to find ourselves forced into, in effect, increasing our quip in some arbitrary fashion to make the numbers appear better, and then we would spend the whole of next year, you know, underperforming, and it would just be horrible. So I think personally, I think honesty is the right answer. And if anything, my question was almost, is 0.5% actually too much? And I would certainly personally say that this, I think this 0.5% must be at risk. I mean, this is not money in the bank. It's a high risk to deliver a 0.5% under whatever surplus. So I would encourage a very firm reduction of any pressure of the sort that you've described.
Okay. Sean?
I just think in terms of the messaging, both internally, what we're trying to do, and also externally, particularly with providers, just we need to be perhaps a little bit clear about what we're saying about quip. So, I mean, even in the paper, we're talking about 13 to 15 million. You know, I think we need to be aiming high, don't we? So I think we need to be saying, actually, because we can see these risks, which are really real risks next year in terms of the position now, even to deliver the 0.5% surplus, I think we probably need to be making a decision, don't we? We're going to say, look, let's aim high for a higher figure, and we've already got some initiatives and things we're trying to work up. Obviously, I take Rebecca's point absolutely on board, that some of it might require upfront investment. We need to work through what does that mean, and what's the evidence base for that. But I think we need to probably be saying, don't we, let's actually set a higher target and do what we can to get a higher level of quip in place to manage the risks which are there, because otherwise I think we are setting ourselves up for a really, really tough year. If we were to deliver the quip that we're setting out here, we can expect significant levels of overperformance. 0.5% contingency isn't very much. Okay, we'll have the 1% non-recurrent, but we can't guarantee that we're going to be able to direct where that goes. So that would be my sort of proposal really for the board.
Okay, thank you. I think that was a really good discussion. I sense, though, that what the board has been asked to do is, in terms of noting the 15-16 report, that's great, thank you. But in terms of the 16-17 plan, I think there's a board decision here, really, that we need to, if we're going to stand firm on this, that actually the board needs to demonstrate that it's in agreement with this approach. So can I just push that a bit further? So 0.5, Stephen, you seemed a bit unhappy with the 0.5%, and it actually should be lower.
No, I would accept that. I accept that, but I would resist going
further. Yeah, is that? Are we happy with that then? I think that's important that that's noted as a board decision. Great, thank you very much. Thank you, Neil, for all your work, as year end is not even here yet, is it? So still keep going. Thank you. And Hardev, thank you very much for keeping us on track for several years. But we can see that we're approaching very, very challenging times. And it's not just us, is it? You know, the system is under enormous challenge, and this is important that we focus on what we have to do in Wandsworth. Shall we have a little quick break before we go on to the next bit? Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so we're on to item 7.1, our self-management programme. So, Andy, are you going to just give us a quick intro? Thank you.
So after that finance discussion, it's time to think positive once again. So we have our annual report here that Amrinda has prepared. Fortunately, sadly, Tanya can't be with us today. But we've also got Peter, who's our self-management clinical lead. And we've got a cast of thousands at the back as well, many of whom have been involved in various self-management initiatives in one form or another. So we'll assume you've read the paper. I'm going to hand over to Amrinda now, and I also note we've got a question from Kate Swinburne, which we'll try and address in subsequent discussion as well. So this is just a report on what's been achieved and what the plans are for the next period of time.
All right, thank you, Andrew. So the expectation programme has been delivered in Wandsworth since 2002. But when the sort of revamp of the NHS took place and the call to action paper was released with a focus on prevention, we decided that the programme needed a revamp as well, and we decided to create a service. As part of that work, we decided that self-management needed to be approached from more than the patient's direction. So as part of this work, Dr. Peter Hill has worked with myself and a few others to create supporting self-management workshop, which is a one-day workshop for healthcare professionals. And the idea was that a healthcare professional would be able to encourage an individual to undertake a self-management course or program within a consultation. But we also understood that the expert patient program, due to its length and how comprehensive it is, may not be appropriate to everyone. So a second part of that piece of work was to create a one-day workshop where we introduce some of the introductory elements of self-management. Also, as part of this prevention work, we wanted to do something different, and that's where the idea of the Wandsworth Wellbeing Hub came about. So we began work on that piece of work, and that finally launched in March. I'm now going to hand over to Peter, who's going to talk a little bit about the Wandsworth Wellbeing Hub.
Yeah, sure. No, thank you very much. So Amrinda's given a snapshot tour, 2 minutes, but actually doesn't really encapsulate everything and the potential, and particularly around preventing ill health, that the whole service and all the elements of it and the commitments of people like James and others who actually have huge impacts on people's lives. And James is going to sort of talk to us in a moment about that. And the thing to add to that as well is that we are having an impact on IAPT as well, because actually part of what we do is actually signpost people towards IAPT. So actually people self-refer as they do in Wandsworth, but through our service. And also lifestyle interventions as well. So I think actually consider the self-management service as preventing ill health, pre-condition and during condition, but also supporting all the other elements that need to be in place around long-term conditions, which is mental well-being and psychological well-being, but also the lifestyle stuff around smoking and alcohol, etc., and exercise and healthy eating. So that's all embedded in there. What we've done is to use a hub, which is essentially a single-page website. That's it. It's nice and simple with a range of buttons on it that some of you would have seen, some of you maybe haven't, but go and play with it. Essentially, the range of buttons actually are buttons to all the things that we've talked about, from self-management programs to IAPS to what is a really core bit, which was beautifully introduced at the beginning, that we hope actually it supports all the amazing work you heard about on the video, because it actually makes all of those charity and voluntary sector organisations visible through the hub, because it's self-registering all those sort of monitored for quality, etc. And actually, it was alluded to, I think Nicola said as well, one of the other things that it supports are peer-led groups as well. So those groups that form that are relatively informal but sometimes more formalised, actually we've invested and supported those groups to form, and we do that through Lifetimes, who actually have a comprehensive programme of
helping people to create their own peer-led groups. In fact, one of my patients came in the other day and said, look, this has transformed my life. I'm now part of a group of 6 of us, and I can't remember what her condition was, but actually she said this really has made a difference. And I lead the group as well, so I feel actually much more confident as well, which is interesting. And she'd been on an expert patient program course, and really happy about that. I think the other thing, so the hub really is a very comprehensive contact point. It's backed up by 2 things. One, really important, we have a critical friends group, which has been very, very active in forming what the program's become about, and they continue to be critical, is exactly the right place to be. So thank you to Kate and all those others who contribute in that. I think the other thing I wanted to say, it does feed into the fact that also that it's accessible across every sector. So it's not just primary care as it says in the paper, but secondary care, charities, voluntary sector organisations use it, Citizen Advice Bureau use it as part of what they do, and also carers who are, and support givers who are supporting their loved ones and people, they use it. So that's really important to say. And also what it supports is what we're trying to do around personalisation and personal health budgets, because it's at least created that visibility alongside all the work that the PPI team has done of organisations that can be and with speech marks bought into in the future when personal health budgets really do take off. So it gives you an opportunity to actually see and almost have a, I hate to say it, but almost like a shopping list that's visible, which I think is going to be very, very powerful. You can see from the paper the sort of activity that we've had, both in programmes but also in utilisation of the hub. I think Amrita alluded to it because we talk about it in phases. It's going to go to a next phase next, and which will be much more service delivered in communities. We've already got, as I said, the Citizens Advice Bureau, and I'm going to partly answer Kate's question actually, because actually one of Kate's questions was around peer-to-peer support, which actually is something that Kate has challenged us on, I think the word is relentlessly and correctly. Sorry, that's meant to be a compliment. No, it is, seriously.
The reason you keep saying that I'm a critical friend.
Sorry, yes, critical friend. Yes. A friendly, critical person. So, but no, absolutely. So, actually, Citizens Advice Bureau actually is delivering some of that already. So they've done that in Battersea and in Wandle. So very much one-to-one work they do. And actually, West Wandsworth is looking to invest in that as well. So that means from a peer-to-peer, much more directed conversation, that's going to happen. Secondly, we've got a small project which is more focused around mental well-being and mental awareness, psychological awareness, which is Putney Wellbeing Friends, which we've invested in as well. It's a testing ground for volunteers who are mental health first aid trained, and it's a drop-in service at Putney Library at the moment, supported by the libraries. They're quite interested to take that further. So that gives you peer-to-peer, one-to-one sort of input around mental health. And the third bit is things such as the diabetes champions, etc., who do much more focused work around diabetes, and all of that sort of comes within our sort of domain, if you like. So I think I've said it enough. I don't know if there's anything else you want to know. Amrinder's nodding, I've said enough.
I just wanted to quickly talk about the evidence. So we spent a large part of the last 12 months putting together evidence to prove what the expert patient program has delivered locally, because we know nationally it has the opportunity to impact outpatient attendances, A&E attendances, and those that present to GP practices. And we've done a lot of local work which proves approximately 120 of the completed over the last 12 months have been able to manage their fatigue better, have had general better health outcomes. They've also managed their pain better, and then they have a greater awareness of self-management and the third sector. But I personally don't feel that this quantitative work really captures what self-management is about. So I'd like to welcome James Locke, who is an expert patient program tutor, just to talk about his own experiences with regards to the program and how living with a long-term condition can change your life, and how accessing a program like this can have a huge impact on how you move forward. So James Locke.
Thank you very much, Amrinder, and hello everyone. I think I need to perhaps put it in context and just tell you a little bit about myself. It was in the mid-1980s that I got a coded message from my GP to tell me that I was actually living with HIV at the time. And not long after, I was asked to, I needed to return to the United Kingdom to look after my partner, who had been diagnosed with toxic plasmosis, a pretty horrible illness. I suddenly found that I had to care for him for 2 years before he sadly passed away. And at the time of my diagnosis, my GP and consultant had said, James, there's no cure, we can't help you very much here, make the most of life, retire, go off, enjoy yourself, do all the things you would like to do. And basically that's what I did, but rather overdid it, to be honest with you, because you know, there was a lot of fear and stigma out there at that time, everywhere, even within the medical field. I remember supporting Peter doing Hickman lines, for example, helping with lumbar punctures, cleaning his room, double barrier nursing, all that sort of thing at the time. And so there was a lot of fear, there was my own difficult emotions, and I went downhill, really, to be perfectly honest with you. I suddenly found alcohol very good to drown my sorrows, and discovered drugs. I mean, at one time I could walk down the middle of the road and sniff the white line quite easily, not looking after myself at all, until suddenly one day I found that I had no job and that I was homeless on the street. And I think that was probably the worst time of my life. All I had was my dignity. And I tell you, you try and go along to the homeless persons unit, they even try and take that away from you. So it wasn't a good place to be. But I knew through, I suppose, anger that I needed to do something about it to help myself. And it was through organisations like the Terence Higgins Trust that I was able to get rehoused and start to rebuild my life. And it's been a long journey, because at one stage I was swallowing 15,000 pills a year until the pills stopped working. And it was around about 2002 that again I'd come to that part of my life where I was told, James, your drugs aren't working for you anymore. I'm afraid, you know, there's not much we can do for you now except make life as comfortable as possible. Then I heard of a new drug called T20 that was being developed at the time in America, and was lucky enough to get on the trial. Needed to wait nearly a year before I got on it, but I was still alive. I mean, I had a T-cell count of 14 and a viral load of 1.3 million. So it wasn't, again, a good place to be. It was only months to live. And went on the drug and started to work with my health professionals, my consultants, the research nurse. I was the first patient outside America on this particular treatment. And of course, it started to work in a relatively short period of time. But as part of that, in dealing with all those feelings and emotions and my fears, and I came across a program called the Expert Patient Program, and a derivative of that was the Positive Self-Management Program, which was for people with HIV, and went along and attended a program and learnt those sorts of basic self-management skills that one needed to start to rebuild my life as such and face the challenges and the adversity that I was facing. So I was so impressed with the program. By this time I was doing a lot of voluntary work for the Ellen John AIDS Foundation, and was approached whether or not we would fund the program, which we did, and went on to become not only attend as a participant, but moved on to become a tutor of the program, and then actually brought it to Hammersmith and Fulham, because I sat on better government for older people at the time on the health committee. So within Hammersmith and Fulham, actually, I created my own job in a strange way. The PCT heard a lot about it, took it on, and we put over 1,000 people through the programme with some remarkable results. And the programme is still running in the tri-borough, as I understand at the moment. So, as I suppose you become very passionate about something that works for you, really, at the end of the day. And it certainly has allowed me to deal with adversity in life, my own fears, because it's just not a physical condition, you know, it's also mind-body relationship and understanding the sort of techniques to deal with all those difficult emotions. And I suppose that's really where it helped me sort of re-engage back into the community and give back what you take out. Because I think you can all agree, you know, pills are important for us, and the medical support I've received has been tremendous. It's been absolutely fantastic. But pills do not actually give you skills at the end of the day. You know, they don't give you the skills to live with a long-term condition and to make the most of life. And this is what I discovered actually with the expert patient program. It gave me the skills that I was even using up to, well, I'm using all the time, the action planning, understanding the symptom cycle, understanding my emotions and feelings and relaxation techniques. I mean, sadly, last month I lost a very close friend who'd been living with cancer, and on the same day she died, my twin brother had a heart attack. So I had to sort of rush up to Wales, and you can imagine, again, all those mixed feelings and emotions and how it can impact on your health. So the skills I think I learned from the expert patient program allowed me, not only gave me a resilience to deal with life and the adversity in life, but to move on and live life and to give back to the community what I took out. And I think that's quite short story really, but
yeah, James,
thank
you for sharing your story with us.
And can I just say one more thing? I would just like to say thank you. Thank you to the board, thank you to my health professionals, thank you to my colleagues as well, because, you know, without the support, we would not have been able, you know, to change so many people's lives. And I see it all the time when I'm out in the community, people coming up to me all the time, thanking what they've learned and got out of the programme.
Right. Well, thank you for sharing your story with us. I think pills don't give you skills will stay with me for a long time. But Amrin, did you have any final comments?
I know Kate had a second question, so I thought I'd address that before we went to the floor. So with regards to the critical friends have been very important to us and the development of the short course. And they will be continuing. We will be looking to set up our next meeting as part of the first quarter of the next financial year.
Could I really stress that point? The short courses are very important, in fact, and we've started to deliver, testing it out. We've tested with some the patient groups that we have, and actually with Malik's support and WCEN, we've actually delivered a course in Khalsa Tooting Centre, which was just extraordinary, because actually following in true fashion of Malik's points, we delivered it actually to leaders in the community there, and even starting the connection to some of the cross-cultural, cross-religious opportunities that we've got. So we're going to continue to work with Malik to take that even further. And the short courses for the practices, we've delivered quite a few to many GPs, nurses, practice managers as well, which actually has that cross-impact to people who are already self-managing or supporting them too.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you. So I'm sure the board will collectively want to thank you all for the work that you're doing. Just phenomenal things going on really, and self-management is so important to all of the rest of our strategy in Wandsworth to build on all the other healthcare services. We have to have patients who are in charge, feel that they're in charge of their own health, and that's our tier 0, and it's really very important. So if I could ask the board to really focus on the ongoing development and the priorities here, I think that probably that's where we can give our reflections and add the most value in the short space of time that we've got. So can we keep questions and comments quite tight, please? Huda.
First of all, thank you, James. That's really inspirational. My question is about how are we prepared as a borough to deal with the issues that are coming up. So I don't know if you can answer this question, or it's something that we need to answer. So from the people who are referring to the hub or accessing the hub, are we finding the right services, the right support mechanisms in the borough to support the individuals? And is it extending well enough to cover, or wide enough to cover things like employment and housing conditions?
The answer is yes. So the way that the hub itself works is if somebody comes in and searches the hub, there's some very good search engines. So you put in keywords, so if it's employment, if it's debt, if it's housing, it searches on that. And there are three databases people search from Care for Me, which we commissioned to develop, and the council's search engine. So, self-directed searches actually find you a whole range of stuff which you can print off and phone up and things like that. So number one. Number two is if you phone up, actually the community navigators on Hub Navigator will actually listen to your conversation, pick out keywords of what you said, repeat that back to you, and then do searches on that. So again, that's very personalised to the individual's story that they tell. And as I say, the CAB bit actually, which has been working well understanding Wandsworth, but also in Battersea, actually do a much more directed piece of work with the individuals. So they actually don't just signpost, they actually are a bit advisory, so they're more of an advisory service. So the hub doesn't advise, it helps you to find things, whereas the CAB actually advises you. So it should be personalised to the individual.
So, but just to add, so I suspect, I don't know this, but I suspect you're using the hub to look at what people search on to see what the big demand areas are. Yes. And if we're not, we probably should be doing that so that we can say, and what more can we do in these areas which people obviously are flagging as big need.
Yeah, I would agree. I think we have enough themes to actually feed that back as a commissioning approach, to be honest with you.
Absolutely. I think that's important. Andy?
Sorry, just on this point, I know also the CAB have a fantastic database of all the queries. I think asking them as the provider to give us some of their themes would be really good.
CAB and us, we both have a query database.
Okay.
And I think I know we fund CAB in the Wanda locality, and also think increasingly in Battersea as well. But one of the things I wanted to flag is that we mentioned nearly 900 voluntary and community groups, and I know we have supported some of them in terms of how they set themselves up, how they link in with us, but I think the information we have in our database is only as good, only as strong as actually those groups out there. So I think it is increasingly our responsibility, now we know what these groups are, and now we try and encourage them to actually work with them in a manner that Hardev described earlier, and recognise that this is just a foundation, it's just the start really, there's clearly a long way to go.
But this is building the links and the connectivity very much, Okay, Stephen.
Just an addition on the CAB, where I'm wearing a charity hat, we're funding CAB in A&E at St George's as well, so if we're looking at CAB data, it might be worth just closing that loop as well. My question was, I don't have a sense from here of the scale of this, and in terms of how many of the potential or the people who could really benefit from such services we're actually reaching. In other words, are we scratching the surface at one end? Are we meeting everybody who could possibly ever need such a service? How many people are there with long-term conditions who could benefit from this kind of service?
Well, in the borough we have approximately around 120,000 people living with a long-term condition. We do our best to go out in the community and work with community groups, and that's something that we've only started to do in the last 12 to 18 months. So we've always held our own courses and gone out and marketed and recruited directly. But what we're doing now is we're working with Wandsworth Carers, we're working with Mind, we're working with Together Your Way to develop courses for the people that they already have of their members. And certainly something that we started this year is working with the Wandsworth Community Empowerment Network. And working with them to kind of access the ME groups, and part of the ongoing thought and plan of that is to eventually have those individuals that have attended to go on and become tutors, which will allow us to deliver courses in alternative languages. And the number of doors that will open as part of that could be endless. We literally could be accessing every part of our community, which we're not currently able to do. That's what the long-term plan is. So at the moment, we're probably doing a little bit more than scratching the surface, but the plans of what we have and what we want to achieve, they're looking fairly big in the future.
Could I just follow that through? So the sort of communities that Amrinder is alluding to is where the condition prevalence and risk of condition is the highest. So actually it's a really target group that actually we don't normally get into, so actually there's opportunities. And to follow through on the community leaders training bit, so somebody who does an expert patient program, so the intent is that some of those leaders will go on the program, then themselves will be trained by James and Kieran and others to become tutors themselves, and then they become tutors in their own communities. So then you can see the cascade effect of that. Second bit is PACT. So, you know, our long-term condition intervention that we aim at primary care, actually, if we're going to do it at scale, it needs to run much more embedded at every level of PACT. So that will be one of the pushes that I would have.
Okay, excellent. Any questions or contributions from members of the public? Okay, thank you. So we could spend a lot longer talking about this, I have to say. We've probably not spent as much time as I would have liked, but it's an excellent report, so thank you for the team and for all the work you've been doing. Really, really great work. And James, your valuable insights, absolutely brilliant. Thank you for coming. We really appreciate that. And I think really what we're saying here is that this, again, it's a bit like the PPI work that Hardev is doing. It's about all the small things and the aggregate of them, but that we have to work out how we do the scale to give as many people as possible access to the skills that they need to manage their own health effectively. So I would encourage the team to work on and how we make that possible. But thank you very much, all of you, much appreciated. Okay, operating plan. So in Lucy's absence, Rebecca, and we've got Debbie here as well, haven't we?
Yes, so I'm just going to give some context, and then Debbie will go through the sort of details of the programme that we've got planned for 16-17. So we've talked a bit earlier about the STP, and the planning guidance this year is basically two tracks. There's a one-year operating plan that the CCG needs to submit by April this year, and alongside that there's a 5-year South West London STP, Sustainability and Transformation Plan, that needs to be ready by June, and that will involve all partners across South West London, including all our providers, local authorities, CCGs, all coming up with a single strategy for the next 5 years. So we're asked that our 1-year plan feeds in as the first year of that 5-year plan. So there is a kind of challenge to making sure that we keep a real local focus on what our local need and what our responses are, but we also describe how that is aligning to what we're doing across South West London and how that's going to deliver a bigger picture of sustainable health services over the next 5 years. So to do that, we've been working with local authority. We also need to work with our sort of social partners around the community to make sure that what we're describing matches up. So there's quite a lot of work gone on around the contracts round with St George's this year, for instance, to make sure that activity that's happening at St George's is understood in the same way. We're making the same kind of growth assumptions. We're making the same. We're agreeing on what we're going to do to manage demand for hospital services. So. That's not so much the focus of this conversation now. The focus of what Debbie's going to talk you through is the very sort of Wandsworth flavour of those plans. So what is it across our commissioning programmes that we're planning to do next year, and how does that reflect what we've heard from our local community over the last year as well. And just to say that this is a very sort of quite an early draft of the plan because it's not submitted till April. So we're bringing it really for a sort of a discussion of content rather than on final appearance of how the report will look. We want it to be a lot more narrative based, a lot more sort of telling the story for Wandsworth rather than sort of bullet points listing a lot of things we're doing. So I think that's the work that Debbie will be doing next, to sort of pull that together, to really talk about our themes around integration, personalisation, proactive management of long-term conditions, all the things that we think are the threads that run through the programme. So I'll hand over to Debbie now. Thank you.
Thank you. So just to start, reiterating what Rebecca has just said, that this is a draft document, and this was based on the submission that went in on the 2nd of March. So there is further iteration that's being worked on. The document is in two parts. The first part is the local narrative, which is intended to be shared with stakeholders to try and describe how we are responding to the planning guidance through our delivery through commissioning programmes, focusing on the transformation, the integration and the personalisation of genders in particular. For each of the programmes, we have included a summary of the vision, which was stated in the commission intentions that were published in October, together with some key elements within the guidance that we need to respond to within that programme. And at the moment, you'll see that, as Rebecca said, it's very much a bullet point of some of the initiatives for each programme, but that is being developed into a more holistic narrative, because there are a lot of elements that are cross-cutting across the programmes, and they don't just work in silos. We've also included some slides on patient engagement and how we are engaging with patients and using their views and experiences to shape delivery of the services that we are commissioning. And from part 2 of the document, this is where we've got the constitutional standards and the activity trajectories. It's not intended to include that in the final document that's published, but that's really for the board to give you some assurance of where we are when the second submission went in. I would just like to draw your attention to the timeline, which is on page 36. The final submission is due on the 11th of April, which is prior to the next board. So as part of the presentation today, we are asking the board to agree Chair's action for sign-off plan.
Yeah.
So rather than go through the slides.
Yeah, okay. No, Debbie, thank you. That's appreciate that. And everyone will have been through them. And we've been through them at management team as well. So, and many people individually have also been through them. So, but it's still work in progress, isn't it, with more to do. So any questions or comments on this? Hardev?
On page 11, other key themes, I just wanted to unpack a little bit what's meant by place-based planning, that the planning by institutions be increasingly be supplemented by planning for populations. What is the vision around them?
So the focus on place-based planning is to get away from organisations working in silos to deliver their objectives without really thinking about how that works across wider localities. So for us, there's a number of place bases. There's obviously a Wandsworth place base, but there's which we need to work with the local authority and with our sort of community and primary care providers to deliver for the whole Wandsworth population in a holistic way, rather than looking at one bit of people's, condition or old life. So it's asking us to kind of work in a more holistic way around our population needs. And then on another level, it's asking us to work with St George's and with Merton as the other key commissioner of St George's, and to have a sort of much more open book approach with St George's to say, how are we going to move performance from where it is now? How are we going to, what is the need for services over the next 5 years? How do we plan for that jointly to be able to safely transfer services where we want to, or do things differently? So I think it's just saying, stop just looking at your organisational objectives and start looking sort of more outward. And then again at the next level up, how across South West London do we make the money and the quality add up across that wider population? So I think it's a really helpful message, but I think it's quite challenging to sort of shift around from the way we planned previously to that more, there isn't necessarily the governance or the ability to do that joint planning very easily at the moment.
Yeah, can I extend? The quite rightly, the CCG will need to prioritise. There's so much going on, and also limited workforce, etc. I just wondered whether this what we're putting in place enable us to carry on with our health wellbeing strategy. We have like wonderful split places. In particular, we said we will start with Roehampton and Battersea, and whether the organisation will have the mental capacity, not the ability, but the capacity, time-wise, etc., to be able to focus on these issues, or is the place at the moment just Wandsworth-wide, and this is what's practically possible?
So I think this is a very interesting kind of conversation we probably ought to have in a board seminar at some point, to say what is our common understanding of this, because it's a sort of term that's being bandied around. I would make a suggestion that everybody reads the King's Fund report on place-based commissioning. Did you? Yes. Yeah, I think it's a really helpful starting point for discussions to understand how we can apply it locally. So perhaps we can think about how we might fit that into our discussions as a board. Andy?
I would say that we already do it to an extent. So about a year ago we talked about the general practice strategy, which is no longer commissioning 42 practices individually, but actually commissioning for their population. So we have the Planning All Care Together contract, which is based on need. with a single provider rather than 42 different contracts done quite disparately. So I think we have made steps to that, but I think there's clearly a need for greater emphasis on that as well.
I think we need to understand what we mean by this term, because it's just going to be used a lot, really, and I think that will help us with our thinking. Thank you. Any more comments, Hardev?
Yeah, so clearly you mentioned at the start this is evolving because time is moving on, and most of the guidance was released quite late in the day. But at the moment it still reads as a position statement of where we are, and reflects some of the intentions. What I was really looking for was what are the outcomes that we're aiming to deliver. So yeah, for all of those categories, what is it for a 1 year plan, which is what an operating plan is supposed to set out. What difference would it make for the CCG and the patients and residents in Wandsworth? Just being a little bit more specific around the outcome measures, whether it's by those themes or other areas. Some of that needs to be pinned down. And even when you go into some of the appendix, those charts and those graphs of activity, they go up to the current position, and it'd be useful to see what the forecast will be going forward, just so we understand what is it that we're aiming for. Is that context?
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah. Sean?
If I could just pick up on one element, which is actually slide 34, page 34 of the pack, which is around right to care, and it's basically there's a lot of more information now being produced nationally, either by NHS England or Public Health England, some of the public health observatories. A lot of information being pulled together now to look at both outcomes across a population basis, but looking specifically what's going on in primary care, secondary care, social care as well, but trying to pull together outcomes on a population basis and try and triangulate that with how much organisations are spending. And so page 34 is a very, very high level summary of lots and lots and lots of information, which tries to pull out what are the opportunities for CCGs to look at where areas where currently outcomes are perhaps not as good as other similar CCGs with similar populations, and also where we're spending more money than other similar CCGs with similar populations. And so you can see that the areas highlighted there, some are across South West London, there's some similar themes. So the particular ones that we've looked at circulatory diseases already, we're now moving on to look in more detail at musculoskeletal conditions and trauma and injuries, which are flagged up there as areas where we both seem to have, to some extent, we've got some issues with outcomes not being as good as elsewhere, similar populations to us, and also high cost as well. We're spending more money. For some of those things, it's not across the board, it's difficult to generalise, there's lots and lots of information there, but just to emphasise, that's the next area we're looking at through the Business Intelligence Group, which will report up to the management team, and then feed into our QUIP programme. And as I said before, I think we need to extend the QUIP programme, and that's where one of the areas where we're beginning to look, so just to sort of explain that a bit more and emphasise that.
Okay.
Just to note as well, I think there's probably just one little change we need to make on slide 30, I think it is, on the finance summary is consistent with the finance report that we just saw, but it actually does mention the heading. I think we haven't quite changed it, Debbie. So it says we're consistent with all the business rules, and of course, as we just discussed earlier, only saying 0.5% surplus.
Small amendment.
Probably just need to tweak the word on that heading.
Yeah.
Almost all the business rules.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Andy.
Just something Huda made a reference to earlier, really, around how we got the capacity to deliver on all of this work. So actually, when you go through it, there are something there's national, there's 9 must-dos, then there's lots of other things, and every single slide seems to have a different priority in it. So I think it's a challenge to ourselves around actually how we got the right capacity in the right manner to actually deliver on this work. And I think I'd also pick up on Hardev's point around we need to be that outcomes focused. So how do we know when we've got there? And I think a lot of this operating plan is quite management speak in the way it sort of it comes across, because it needs to be like that as well. So I think just kind of reflecting it in the work that we do, which is essentially better care and healthy future for Wandsworth, and how we can then align the outcomes to it would be, I think, quite beneficial.
Yeah. Okay. Graham, anything to add in terms of
actually, the one thing I would have said is what Andy's just said. It's about, so if we sign up to this plan, is it deliverable, and particularly looping back to the finance discussion earlier. So I think as a board, we want it to be, ambitious and with stretch in it, but we also needed to be realistic and to focus on those things that are most important and kind of within our resources to deliver. So I think maybe that's the next stage, getting this ready for sign-off. But we commit to things we know and are confident we can absolutely deliver.
Yeah. Hardev, final?
I'll be very quick. Really delighted to see musculoskeletal here. I think so overdue, and I hope this would be looked at holistically, not just the services for musculoskeletal, because about being mobile and active, isn't it?
Yeah.
And we'll be delighted to work with you and make it a priority within the public health team as well to work with you on this one and really make a big impact.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay, so so there's some more iterations of this report to go through, but ultimately what we're asking the board for is approving the approach really at this stage rather than the detail of it, and because of the timeline for submission, agreeing that we'll use Chair's action for submission of the final report. So is the board in agreement with that approach?
Yes.
Good. Thank you very much. Thank you, Debbie. Keep going. Lot to do still, but fantastic. Okay, board assurance framework. Sean, are you going to...
Well, just to introduce it, given the board are very familiar with the document, but this is an updated version, so all the directors have gone through all of their responsibilities, reviewed all of the risks, and there's updates here right across the board. I'm not going to go through it page by page, just to note that one of the risks score has been increased, so risk 7 around the financial position of the whole local health social care economy, which partly links into the discussion we had under the financial report earlier. Clearly it's increasingly tough across South West London. Some of our other organisations we work with and commission from, and also the CCG, so that risk rating has gone up. The other risks scores haven't changed, but we've updated quite a lot of the information here about the nature of the risk, and also the controls are in place and some of the assurances as well. I don't think there's anything in particular I wanted to highlight, so it's probably just helpful if people have got questions. The relevant director, I'm sure, can pick that up.
Thank you. I think it's important that we've updated this and that we keep this very live, because you know the risks are mounting in a way at the moment. Anyone have any particular comments or questions on any of the areas, or any concerns about any of the risks? Stephen.
It's a slight worry, I suppose. I'm looking, for example, at Finance 1, Objective 1, the Commission High Quality to improve outcomes and reduce inequalities. And it says main controls in place. And this is, I'm doing this as an example, but maybe a more generic point. The controls are all listed there, are all fine in themselves, but they are essentially processy ones. And they're fairly high level. I mean, I was slightly worried as the chair of the Finance Resource Committee that, for example, the ultimate thing seems to be we will review the plans, and that's fine, but it's not really describing how we keep, money under control really in the organisation.
Yeah.
So it's a kind of just a slight unease. It's not that anything is wrong, but are we actually saying how these various risks will be gripped at a sort of operational working level, as distinct from being reported up the pyramid to some august committee who sort of say, gosh, that's interesting.
Yeah, no, I would absolutely agree with that. I think that this, I mean, Graham, probably to work out what we need to do with this. I think now that this risk is well understood at this point in the year, then I think that we need some big thinking actually to work out what our approach to this is. So can I leave to you to propose how we take that forward? Thank you, Stephen. I think that's very helpful. Any other areas that people want to flag? Comments from members of the public on our big list of risks? Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Sean, for nagging everyone to keep that up to date. Much appreciated. Probably Sandra, actually. Yeah. Good. Okay. So items for assurance and information, really. So executive report. Anybody want to just flag anything or any comment on that? No? Okay. Thank you. And then the assurance scorecard. Sean, anything to say?
Well, the report, I'm sure board members have had a chance to read it. A&E performance continues to be an issue of concern, despite the fact we've got the flow programme up and running with the Trust and other partners, and we're still in a difficult period in the winter, even though it's not been a particularly severe winter. There's been some issues with infection control, there's a little bit of norovirus and flu, but nothing that's been too extreme, and yet performance is still difficult in A&E, and I think we're doing a lot of work with the Trust to try and sort of understand that, whether the extent to which it's attendance levels or acuity. There's certainly been a lot of pressure in the emergency department at St George's. They are looking at increased number of cubicles. There's a piece of work in place to increase the capacity there with another 3 cubicles, but there is a lot of pressure, certainly in the emergency care system, and a large part of the work we're doing is both working with the Trust on the inflows, but also just to make sure that they keep levels of discharges up and increase discharges earlier in the day, and I think that's absolutely crucial to make sure there are beds available. In terms of cancer, we've seen an improvement in December, although the figures aren't in this report, but there will be in subsequent reports around January. It looks like there's been a bit of a deterioration in January, so just to make the board aware of that. The figures have only just come through in the last couple of days, so we haven't yet understood the full reasons for those breaches. St George's had flagged, and other providers in South West London have flagged that some of it was to do with the knock-on effect over the Christmas, New Year period, where some patients either deliberately deferred their treatment or they hadn't been treated over that period, and therefore they were then going to be treated in January, and we'd see a few longer waits there, but it's slightly worse than we'd expected, and the 31-day standard hasn't been met in January, and we're just trying to understand with the Trust why that is. Improving access to psychological therapies, we're working very closely with the Mental Health Trust on that. So to give an update again, beyond the data that's in this report, so unpublished data in February suggests the Trust was on track with their new recovery trajectory, which is catching up to make sure that we hit the overall access target for the year, which is encouraging, but it's still really close. So we're going to be within a very small number of hitting the target, or just missing the target one way or the other by the end of March, but we are tracking that, and they're trying to get data on a more real-time basis. We can actually track it on a week-by-week, day-by-day basis. At the moment there's a time lag of about a week and a bit before we see the numbers, but that is encouraging. I think they've really stepped up well, to be honest, and they've put a lot of extra capacity and a lot of effort in place. There's leaflets going round to tens of thousands of homes around Wandsworth, which is already happening. Adverts on buses and billboards, etc. So there's a lot happening there as well, and so that's encouraging. The numbers are coming up, but I'm still not sure whether we'll hit the target, so I can't give absolute reassurance to the board on that one, but that's one we're absolutely focused on trying to hit that target this year.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from anyone on this report?
Just asking about a tiny bit more detail on the IAPS. Is there a shift in the acuity of the patients that they're seeing to actually meet those targets that you noticed?
No, there isn't. No, actually, they've made sure they've put a lot of capacity in place for the step 2, step 3 patients, but there isn't, and they're keeping up. Access times and waiting times are still pretty good as well. So we're making sure that they're not skewing things at all. Things not being skewed. What we're looking at in terms of expecting this influx of referrals with the marketing campaign that started, and they're getting some of that already. The Trust doing more analysis than on who is it who's being attracted, and just making sure we can understand that, partly from the perspective of, are these people who are going to benefit from psychological therapies, or are we actually attracting people who can benefit? But also I'm keen to make sure we understand, are we reaching all the relevant groups of people that we could reach, in terms of all the demographic groups. So for example, I looked at the data earlier on in the year, and if you just look at the male-female split, for example, there was slightly less men as a proportion of users than the country as a whole, for example. And so I was trying to talk to them about that, and I think that is something that is the case nationally. There are more women that use psychological therapies, the IAPS services, than men nationally, but it was even more of a I could use the word bias, but there was there were even less men. So we need to make sure that we're looking at making sure we're getting to all of the relevant groups who might use those services. There's trust doing a lot of data analysis on that, but happy to share that with you.
Okay, good, thank you. Anything else from anyone? Okay, thank you. So on the South West London Collaborative, so Kay sometimes comes
yeah,
with today.
Kay sent her apologies, so, and I wasn't anticipating we'll have a lot of discussion on these papers, but there's just two sets of papers essentially, so just draw your attention to them. The first, the set of slides, is the monthly update that Kay has now started to provide for all CCGs about the work of the collaborative. As you'd expect, and it links to the item on our operating plan, much of the focus of the collaborative at the moment is on the preparation of the work for the South West London-wide sustainability and transformation plan that we heard earlier. And the slide set also includes some summary details of other areas of joint work across the collaborative. For example, the rollout of the Patient Online initiative across primary care. The second set of papers is a refreshed version of all of the governance arrangements and what appears to be multiple terms of reference for the various different working groups. The reason why we have these back in front of us, having previously approved them, is they've just been amended slightly to take on board all of the recent guidance around strategic planning group requirements and what has to be done around the sustainability and transformation plan. So there's nothing materially different in terms of the number of groups or the membership or anything like that, but it's more just to make sure they're completely up to date and relevant. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anything to ask Stephen?
Two questions. One is more processy one about the terms of reference, all that, which it's really a question: is there some other document or a further bit to be added to this describing the arrangements for resourcing the programme? And I'm thinking about the audit of it. Yeah. It's a bit of a sort of loose end. Yeah. There's quite serious money being spent on this programme. Yeah. It comes under us, I think, as Wandsworth CCG as hosts. As Finance Committee and Audit, we are slightly conscious of this, but it's not really set out anywhere. Yeah. And I think other CCGs ought to be interested in those questions as well, and indeed raises questions about whether they should have some involvement in some of those discussions. So there's a whole, the management of the programme itself is another sort of chunk of governance that isn't addressed here, and I think it'd be helpful to have that set out somewhere. Okay. My more substantive question is, I think we heard earlier that the plan itself has to be delivered by June. So my question, I guess, is at what point will CCGs be consulted on what I would always call emerging findings? I mean, it doesn't seem to be satisfactory to wait until the last minute and then we are asked to sort of just sign it off. I think as we as organisations need the opportunity to input to the substance of the programme at a stage where there is something to discuss, and not just looking at the ceiling, but equally where it's sufficiently early to be able to influence it, as it were, or raise genuine questions. So I think in terms of the timetable, June isn't very far away, and I'm conscious that the vast numbers of stakeholders, all of whom have interests in this, I can see it's a real problem. I don't, it's not easy, but I do think it would be useful to know.
Yeah. Okay. So quickly on both points, if I may, I'll take both away as well. I think they need some detail, I think, outside the room. But I would agree with you. I don't think the governance arrangements I set out describe specifically enough the resourcing and the audit trail for that. It is embedded within the programme, so I reflect this year. I could point you to which group has, for example, reviewed the overall programme running costs and all those things, but it's not set out clearly, so we can improve that. The issue about CCG visibility of the plans is a really important one, and we need to make sure it's sequenced into each governing body meeting. The expectation is we have a firmish draft for April before the final submission in June, so I would expect every governing body to be seeing it back in that kind of window around April, May, but we do need to confirm that.
And whether we need a seminar type discussion
as
well as
ahead of agree.
Carol.
Well, I've read this with great interest, and it's clearly going to be a difficult process. So an April early draft or possibility will be in part 2 or a seminar, presumably. because the emphasis on achieving consensus and the difficulties if there are options that the language in this is quite deliberately opaque, some of it. So I think it's going to be an interesting next few months on this.
Yeah, so I'll take back to the collaborative the need to map out the timetable, what would happen in seminar mode, what might very appropriately happen by bringing boards together across South West London in some sort of seminar as well to share and develop it once before it comes back for formal approvals.
Cool. Anything else on the South West London? Okay, Graham, thank you very much.
Oh, sorry, I have one
Oh,
point.
go on
Beg your
then.
pardon. Page 39, somebody's being asked to approve something, and I think they should be asked to propose it. Sorry, I have time 39. I can't scroll too fast enough.
This is in the terms of reference for the
Transformation Group.
Strategic Planning
So they
Group.
say approve the governance arrangements. I think they should be proposing the governance arrangements. It's for governing bodies to approve
Yes,
the governing body.
indeed.
Yeah.
Good. Oh,
Yeah. Wow.
how impressed am I? Thank you. Okay, thank you. So we've got summary minutes of the Integrated Governance Committee and the Finance Resources Committee. Anything of concern or for clarity with those? Okay, thank you. And anything that anybody in members of the public would like to raise or ask of the board? Malik, yeah.
Just something, thank you. I know that this is the last couple of days that Hardev is spending here at the CCG. And just from the Community Empowerment Network, I'd like to say thank you to Hardev publicly for the work that is done. I know it's not an easy trip up to the Darlington Estate in North Battersea where we're based. Hardev came visiting us on a number of occasions and not only accepted the challenge that we presented, and I suppose it wouldn't surprise you, he gave back as good as he got. And what that allowed for was a very healthy exchange and conversation. And for us at the Community Empowerment Network, it certainly sharpened our game, woke us up to a number of the complexities of the challenges, and enriched us as an organisation. And we've already heard some of the contributions that he's made in relation to thinking partners and so on and so forth. And we certainly will be working with colleagues to take that legacy forward. So thank you, Hardev. But also a plea with Hardev leaving CCG, that is 50% of your lived diversity disappearing from the board. Not only was he bringing in his financial expertise, but his experience as a member of the BME community disappears from the board. That just leaves Huda as the only person standing in a borough that has 35% BME, in a city that has 40% and rising BME communities. I think it's something that the board needs to consider about how do you fill that gap, and I'm sure that's something that you will do taken forward.
Yeah, Malik, thank you. Thank you for your thanks for Hardev on his behalf. I think we all recognise that. In fact, I'm going to say a formal goodbye to him in a moment, but recognise your points about us as a board. Absolutely. So, in fact, I would like to do an AOB and bid a formal farewell to two of our board members. Firstly, Dr. Peter Ilves, who's shedding his locality clinical lead role. So, just to assure the board, we've got plans in place to ensure we have a replacement elected in the near future. Unfortunately for us, Peter's going to be continuing in his other roles in self-management and personalisation, and the evidence of his passion for those has been seen today. So we look forward to hearing of your further successes in those work streams, Peter. But thank you for the work that you've done for West Wandsworth, where I think you have, through a really inclusive approach, taken the locality into new collaborative territory. This wasn't how it looked a few years ago before you. So I think that's been really important. And thank you for your input, particularly at management team, where you've often helped us to think differently and have fun. And in fact, always to be human and kind. So we wish you all the luck in the future. But we'll be seeing you again. So but thank you from the board. Also say goodbye to Hardev. So Hardev's been with us from the start. He was mine and Graham's first appointment to the board, and he's been absolutely instrumental in ensuring that the CCG delivers its statutory targets and statutory functions and financial targets. But as we've seen today, you know, Hardev has provided much more than that financial advice and expertise, and he's been a great ambassador for the CCG. He's hugely respected by our stakeholder organisations and by our providers. And by the other CCGs in South West London, and in particular the other CFOs who've really looked to him for leadership, and that will be very much missed. And you know, Hardev, you've really embodied the value-driven approach that we have as a CCG, and you've taken the inequalities agenda and PPI and made them your own. So thank you for contributing so significantly to the CCG, and the best of luck in your career. And what a way to go out today. Well done. It's been the Hardev Virdee show. So thank you. Do we have any other business? Huda.
This is from ITV News yesterday. Smokers in Camden and Wandsworth are among London's most successful quitters. If you are trying to give up smoking and live in Havering, Camden or Wandsworth, you may have more chance than most. Our prevalence rate is 14% and our quit rate is 63%. And I remember doing public health reports when I used to treat prevalence rate 28% and going up to 40s for the manual groups and no services whatsoever. I asked the team, actually, even before this was published, why is our service performing better in terms of quit rates than others? And the key theme is the relationship with primary care. And how helpful the practices have been, and primary care in a wider sense, both general practice and pharmacy. So I want to formally thank all our colleagues in primary care for putting Wandsworth on the map and just making a difference to real people and quality of life and health outcomes.
That's very good, AOB. Thank you very much, Huda. Oh, it is, yeah, no, absolutely. Good. Thank you to the board. Thank you to everybody for attending today. We appreciate your attendance. And we're moving on to a part 2 now, so quick stretch everyone, but then back in a second.
Oh my goodness.